We found in the first episode of this series on truth and power that we can never comprehend objective truth, that the best we can do is to arrive at subjective truth, which has limitations, which can approach but never become one with objective truth. Today, we are going to look at those limitations, the rational limitations, both on reason and on judgment. I will focus today on the limitations on human reason and leave the discussion on the limitations on judgment for our next talk. Hello and peace to all of you. I am Louay Safi, and this is the third episode of Truth and Power. In this episode, I'm going to look into the various conditions that make our human knowledge limited, and hence we can never fully comprehend the notion of truth. We can only comprehend the appearance, but what is behind the apparent, what is the deep ground of what we see in front of us, remains hidden from us because of the limitations that we have in our ability to reason. In modern times, the first philosopher to really tackle this question in a very thorough way was Immanuel Kant, who in his important work, The Critique of Pure Reason, has demonstrated that we have no access to metaphysical knowledge. The only knowledge we have is of the physical world. But then in his arguments, he tried to respond to the empiricist view of the truth. He was particularly responding to David Hume, who has completely negated that there is any innate knowledge that we have. There is no a priori knowledge that we have that help us to discover any acquired knowledge. That was his thesis, and he argued that people are born with a blank mind, a sort of tabula rasa, to use the Latin word, a clean slate. There was nothing in our mind when we were born, and everything we learned through our experience. We learned a posteriori, as the philosophical term goes. So there was no a priori knowledge, but only posteriori knowledge, something that we acquired through experience. Now, Kant did not agree with that. He argued that there are two fundamental concepts or categories that we have at the moment of birth, and those are categories that are very much necessary to organize the world around us. These are the category of time and space. Time and space is not learned, but it is an innate knowledge. But then he dismissed any other knowledge to be innate. In a sense, Kant really followed in the footsteps of the Islamic rationalists, who were the first to talk about the limitation on human reasoning. The Greek thought, reason can access anything, including the metaphysical, and that's why they have certain theories about who is God and what's the quote-unquote nature of God. But around the 12th century of the Common Era, a Muslim rationalist with the name of Al-Ghazali wrote a book in which he refuted those arguments or assertions of the Greeks, the Greek philosophers, and he showed that the best we could do, or our reason can do, is to comprehend the physical world, the transcendental world. We can only speculate about it, but we cannot develop any certain knowledge about the metaphysical world. This theory was advanced later by Ibn Khaldun, the Andalusian philosopher, an historian, who really also the father of sociology. He is the true father of sociology. The first sociological analysis was done by him, and he has made a good impact on European philosophers, including economists, because part of what he has written on he developed a number of economic principles, including the principle that really were developed very, very recently, the principle of crowding, that if the government compete with private business, then it has the ability to drive all private business out of the market, but that would be a loss because governments who do that will have a decreased revenue as time goes by. All right, then now we can talk about innate knowledge and acquired knowledge. This concept of innate knowledge we are born with, a priori knowledge, was really articulated in a very good way in a book written by a Muslim rationalist around the 8th century of the Common Era. The book titled The Substance of Reason. And in that book, he differentiated between innate or inherent knowledge and acquired knowledge. But what is this innate knowledge? As I indicated, Kant did not really provide a full picture of that innate knowledge and sort of limited that knowledge to the two categories of space and time. But Islamic rationalists went beyond that to talk about innate knowledge that has to do with our ability to conceive things, and innate knowledge that has to do with our ability to judge things, like ability to have innate norms or values that every human being is born with that capability to make judgment between beauty and ugliness. This is an innate to the human being, and it is not acquired from society. And that's why individuals can advance those kind of categories of beauty and show how ugliness has different forms, both in the natural order and in the human order. Let me now move on to talk about pure reason as an innate knowledge that we are born with. And here are 4 principles that really are very much part of our makeup as rational beings. So the 4 principles of logic, the principle of identity, that A is A, that John or Said is Said, and John is John, and Said is Said, and John cannot be James, but must be John. So every human being has their own identity. This is, or everything really around us has an identity and should not be really, this identity has to be maintained. And we can mix between identities. So that is a principle of logic, which is an innate principle upon which all the acquired knowledge that we have depends. So our mind have that capacity. Also the principle of difference, that A is not B and B is not A, that an apple is not an orange, and vice versa. This is an innate thing that a child has, that an infant, as start to look around and observe reality, has that capacity built in the mind of the infant. And the principle of contradiction or non-contradiction, that either A or not A. You can't have the thing present and absent at the same time. This is sort of a built-in principles or mechanisms of human rationality that every human being has, and this is not taught but built in we discovered that, of course. I mean, philosophers and people who focus on epistemology discover that, but it is so is the principle of causality or causation, that B caused by A is something really the human mind has that capacity built in. We come with that capacity, and hence we can distinguish between causality and correlation. We can distinguish between the fact that the sun when it rises to bring light of the day, and we don't think, for example, there are some other things that happen at the same time that correlate with it is the cause of the light of the day. It is the sun. And not, for example, the fact that the peacock, for example, sounded early prior to the rise of the sun. We attribute that to the sound or the presence of the peacock rather than anything else. So this is something that we need to be mindful of. So reason is innate to us, but reason and the principle of logic are not the most fundamental aspect of a human rationality. In fact, our reason is grounded in something we call intuition. So the intuition is the ground of reason. Intuition is much wider source of human knowledge than reason. Reason is that aspect of our mental capacity to systematize knowledge or to try to organize our knowledge so we can examine it in order to make sure that it corresponds with real objects, that what we conceive is really corresponding with real objects, and to ascertain that we need to run experimentation. And so what is intuition? Intuition is this what we call sometimes in the very casual way our gut feeling, that this knowledge that we have, but we can't really analyze it in the same way we analyze acquired knowledge, but it is really the foundation of any acquired knowledge. So there are 4 types of intuition. You have sensuous intuition that happen because of the senses, and intuition, unlike reasoning, is a direct knowledge. We don't need to prove have any proof to say that we are looking at a car. If somebody asks us, what's the proof that you are looking at a car? You can say, well, I see it. So it is direct knowledge coming from our senses, and there is no need really to prove it. And the only affirmation of that is that when other people look at the same object, they can say, okay, we are looking at the car. So this is sensuous knowledge. There's another innate knowledge, which is intuitive knowledge as well. The words are really connote the same thing. Intuitive, which is normative knowledge. To say that, to kill a child, an innocent child, to kill it for sport is a major crime, is a huge sin, is an innate judgment of ours. Of course, norms have to do with our ability to judge reality around us, not the physical, but particularly the human reality. And I will expand on this concept in the next talk when we talk about judgment, or really the limitation of the judgment is what we call human bias. We discuss the notion of bias and what is bias and why we have biases. But that has to do with the fact that we have norms. Our consciousness has the capacity to judge things. That this is beautiful, this is ugly. And this beautiful and ugly, of course, Islamic rationalists who developed this concept used it really also to judge actions, not only objects. And of course, in the Arabic language, Hasan can be used to describe an action as well as to describe an object, like a tree or a physical object. We could the same thing really in other languages. We can say like this massacre that's committed by a terrorist is an ugly act, because really it is. By that, of course, we mean it's a criminal act. It's an act that has to be condemned because it's not worthy of a human being. It is very barbaric. It's a very unacceptable. Then we have the experiential intuition, and that's an intuition really. It's basically it's a mix of something that's innate in us that allow us to, through practice and through repetition, to internalize certain information and recall it without even thinking. For example, a good mechanic could look quickly at the engine and listen to the noise in the engine and decide immediately where is the problem. Or a doctor could really look at the patient and immediately look at maybe the color of the skin, the color of the eye, the way the patient is breathing, etc., and tell exactly what the problem is. Of course, most physicians today would like to affirm their intuitive judgment by conducting experimentation to make sure that their judgment is not biased. We'll talk about bias, as I said, in the next lecture. And then finally, we have this creative intuition. Creativity is intuitive. Artists and musicians, yes, they develop their skills by learning music, by listening to music, by conducting music. But then at one point, this knowledge becomes internalized and mixed with something that is innate to the human being that allow humans to be creative, to bring up a new type of music we never heard before. Or the same thing happened with poets. Poets memorize a lot of poems, but at one point they developed this capacity to produce new poems, beautiful, impactful, and never tried before. This is a creativity. And of course, creativity is really a synthetic knowledge. It's a synthesis. And that's a capacity of humans. And that's exactly what we mean when we talk about the intelligence, human intelligence. Human intelligence is none other than this intuitive capacity that humans have, and so they can really quickly pick exactly what is the cause of that illness, or what is the problem with this particular car, as I pointed out, or their creativity. We call it intelligence. We call it like a person who does that, smart person, is the ability of someone to recall something quickly without even thinking. But the question is, how does intuition relate to reason? Well, reason is really the central core of the larger circle that we call intuition. So intuition is the large set of data and information we internalize, mixed with our innate principles that we are born with, like these 4 principles of logic, or our ability to distinguish between an ugly act and a beautiful act, or an ugly scene and beautiful scene. And this is definitely not acquired. In fact, infants, you could show them 2 pictures. One will make them laugh or smile, and the other will make them cry. And of course, it has to do with whether the face in that picture shows an ugly, an angry, an unpleasant face or a pleasing face. And the same thing with the noise. There are some noise make the infant like calm. Other type of noises make them cry. And that has to do with this innate capacity that the infants are born with. These are never acquired. So our mind is never tabula rasa, as the empiricists have insisted for a long time. And in fact, some of them continue to make that argument. With this, I hope I have shed some light on the notion, on the limitation of human rationality. I focus on the limits of reason. In the next talk, I will move on to talk about the limits of human judgment, and specifically focus on the biases, both the conscious biases that we have, we call prejudice, or on the unconscious biases that no human being can escape. All of us have that unconscious bias because of certain qualities of the human consciousness that I will discuss with you in our next meeting. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe if you want to become aware of the next episodes. And if you like this presentation, so please show that. Give this video a like, and I'll see you in the next episode.